be able to talk to you about this? How would you recommend they go about it?
Like asking for like my address or my phone number, or like my location share. Or I could just location share you, and then we could.
An actor who does press for a movie about such a serious topic, you gotta talk about it.
Right.
And oftentimes, that's as much as we love doing fun interviews with these actors and kind of having that moment. I always sort of use the bar of let the tone of the movie set the tone for the interview.
Today is a major day in the courtroom saga. Judgment Day has finally arrived for Blake Lively. Well, technically, it's summary judgment day. But let's be real. In Hollywood legal drama terms, that's basically the big buzzer beater moment. Everyone's on edge, wondering if this will be the endgame for Blake or just another plot twist in her never-ending legal roller coaster. If the summary judgment is granted in full, and I should stress, that's a big if. This could hit Blake like a ton of bricks. We're talking a thud of an ending, the kind that echoes through headlines, social media, and gossip columns alike. The stakes are high, and Blake's empire of image control might face its first real crack under the pressure. Meanwhile, Wayfair isn't backing down. They've come out swinging, fully backed by their co-defendants Jamie Heath, Justin Baldoni, Jean Ale, and Melissa Nathan, all seemingly ready to make this courtroom a battleground. It's a calculated, aggressive push that could reshape the whole narrative. And if Blake thought she could glide through this on charm and media spin, well, today might prove otherwise. And let's not forget Steve Sarowitz. He's part of this courtroom chess game too. In the summary judgment filing, the defendants go into meticulous detail about why Blake Lively's lawsuit allegedly doesn't hold water. They dissect the sexual harassment allegations, explain why she wasn't a contractual employee, and emphasize that she was technically a contractor. They point out that she never even signed her contract, meaning it was never fully executed. The document also highlights just how much control Blake had over the production, reinforcing the argument that she was never in a traditional employee role. The level of detail here is intense, walking through each point systematically. Honestly, as I was reading this morning, I was pretty blown away. It's one thing to hear about these issues in passing, but seeing them laid out in a single, robust legal filing really drives home the complexity of the case. Even with all this, though, it's not a done deal. Summary judgment can go either way, and while the document is impressive in its scope and thoroughness, the court could still rule differently. But there's no denying that this filing paints a very specific picture of why the defendants believe Blake's claims may not meet the legal threshold. Now, I'm not saying all of this will automatically be granted. Summary judgment can swing either way, but the defendants have certainly laid out some compelling arguments. It will be interesting to see how Blake's team responds. Beyond the legal reasoning, they've also submitted a massive amount of evidence. We're talking more than 200 attachments to this motion. That's a staggering amount of material to sift through. Many of these documents are initially filed under seal. But here's the kicker. They're only under seal for 1 week. After that, Blake will need to decide whether she wants to keep any of them confidential. Wayfair even stated in a letter to the judge that they believe everything, including Blake's desk deposition testimony, should be public because this is such a pivotal dispositive motion. This aligns with the judge's past decisions to unseal documents connected to dispositive motions in the interest of public understanding. Essentially, the defendants are signaling only truly confidential information should remain sealed. And most of what Blake wants to keep under wraps doesn't meet that standard. It's also worth noting that Wayfair and their co-defendants Justin, Jun, Melissa, Jamie, and Steve have already unsealed their deposition transcripts. While not the full transcripts, we now get to see and hear portions of their testimony for the first time. This is a big deal because it allows the public and us to finally hear their side directly, without the usual media spin or secondhand summaries. What I love about this filing, beyond the sheer volume of evidence, is the approach. Alexander Shapiro drafted it, and it's a marked contrast to Blake's complaint. One of my main criticisms of her original filing was that it often felt like it was just about labeling her a liar, blaming her, rather than addressing the legal standards. Shapiro's response doesn't dwell on whether Blake is truthful or not. Instead, it carefully argues that her claims simply don't meet the necessary legal requirements. It's about structure, procedure, and law, not personal attacks, something that makes this filing feel much more robust and strategically sound. Importantly, The filing isn't focused on whether Blake is lying about some of her claims. Instead, it zeroes in on the legal standards, arguing that her allegations simply don't meet the burden required for a sexual harassment claim. By doing so, it removes a lot of the language that could be perceived as victim-blaming language that Justin Baldoni, among others, had been criticized for in the past. This approach shows a clear awareness of the optics of the case. The defendants seem to understand that this isn't just a legal battle, it's a very public story with real-world implications. By focusing on the law and procedural issues rather than attacking Blake personally, they avoid perpetuating harmful narratives. That's reassuring for anyone who has experienced harassment because it ensures that the discussion stays about legal standards rather than undermining the experiences of victims. The filing also emphasizes that this case isn't about making anyone feel like a liar. Instead, it strictly examines whether Blake's claims meet the legal requirements for a sexual harassment claim. The defendants are framing the argument around the law, not perception, which shifts the focus from personal attacks to objective standards. One of their central arguments is that Blake herself held significant control over the production. The claim that the defendants had power over her, they argue, simply doesn't hold up because, legally speaking, a sexual harassment claim requires a power imbalance. In their summary judgment, the defendants meticulously lay out how Blake was in a position of authority and influence, making many of her claims about being controlled implausible. They start by noting that Blake was an immensely powerful A-list actor, generous wording, but accurate in context, and had agreed to star in the film adaptation of It Ends With Us, a story dealing with sex and domestic violence. During the early stages of filming, she raised objections to certain on-set behaviors she found inappropriate. The defendants argue that these behaviors involved little more than miscommunication or awkward comments, which clearly fall below the legal threshold for sexual harassment or any other actionable wrongdoing, especially given the context of a high-pressure film set. The defendants also emphasize that the production was a collaborative effort, creating films that were intentionally sensual and provocative. Despite this, Blake's concerns were heard and fully accommodated. It's undisputed that whenever she claimed she had issues, filming continued smoothly, and subsequent stages proceeded without incident. The environment, which Blake herself had previously praised, remained professional, and even her own lawyers acknowledged that no formal HR process or litigation was necessary because any issues had been successfully resolved. This framing sets the stage. Clearly, the dispute isn't about whether certain incidents occurred. Everyone agrees some things happened. The focus is strictly on whether those incidents meet the legal definition of sexual harassment. The defendants point out that months passed without further issue until the film moved into editing and toward its premiere. At that point, they argue, Blake asserted significant control over the film and took aggressive steps to minimize Justin Baldoni's involvement, even though he had conceived, directed, and co-starred in the project. The film had been produced and co-signed by his production company, Wayfair Studios, yet Blake is depicted as taking the reins in a way that underscored her authority over the final product. They also spend a lot of time breaking down the question of control, how much authority Blake actually exercised over the production versus how much control the defendants had over her. This matters because determining whether someone is legally an employee depends heavily on who held the power. And under federal law, discrimination and sexual harassment protections generally apply only to employees, not independent contractors. The summary judgment then revisits what happened once Blake raised her concerns. She sent a protections letter that included a list of accommodations, and her own attorney stated that if the defendants agreed to these conditions, it would serve in lieu of any formal HR process. They also made it clear that Blake was not filing a complaint, not initiating litigation, and not going through any formal channels while still reserving all legal rights. The defendants used this to argue that even Blake's lawyers implicitly acknowledged her allegations didn't meet the legal threshold for sexual harassment. Because if they had, her attorneys would have triggered a formal HR investigation or launched a complaint. They didn't single quotes T. This leads into another major issue. Can the so-called protections document even be enforced? It was a side letter amendment to the larger actor loan-out agreement, the main contract. Blake was required to sign, but never did. The defendants argue that you can't enforce one amendment to a contract you never fully executed. If the main agreement wasn't signed, then anything incorporated into it becomes legally questionable. From there, the summary judgment shifts into two major categories. Is any of this sexual harassment under the law? Is any of this enforceable contractually? They note that Blake herself agreed. Today is a major day in the courtroom saga. Judgment Day has finally arrived for Blake Lively. Well, technically, it's summary judgment day. But let's be real. In Hollywood legal drama terms, that's basically the big buzzer beater moment. Everyone's on edge, wondering if this will be the endgame for Blake or just another plot twist in her never-ending legal roller coaster. If the summary judgment is granted in full, and I should stress, that's a big if. This could hit Blake like a ton of bricks. We're talking a thud of an ending, the kind that echoes through headlines, social media, and gossip columns alike. The stakes are high, and Blake's empire of image control might face its first real crack under the pressure. Meanwhile, Wayfair isn't backing down. They've come out swinging, fully backed by their co-defendants Jamie Heath, Justin Baldoni, Jean Ale, and Melissa Nathan, all seemingly ready to make this courtroom a battleground. It's a calculated, aggressive push that could reshape the whole narrative. And if Blake thought she could glide through this on charm and media spin, well, today might prove otherwise. And let's not forget Steve Sarowitz. He's part of this courtroom chess game too. In the summary judgment filing, the defendants go into meticulous detail about why Blake Lively's lawsuit allegedly doesn't hold water. They dissect the sexual harassment allegations, explain why she wasn't a contractual employee, and emphasize that she was technically a contractor. They point out that she never even signed her contract.